Good evening, school committee members. My name is Casey Anthony, and I'm a bilingual special educator at one of the two-way dual language schools in the district. I'm here tonight to argue in favor of increased bilingual opportunities for students in the Framingham Public Schools. I will begin with a theoretical framework for discussing bilingual education, followed by the historical background of bilingual education in the United States and Massachusetts, in order to adequately situate us in this issue. I will then propose my policies, identify benefits, and address common concerns. My presentation will conclude with time for questions and answers. When scholars speak about bilingual education, they refer to one of two language ideologies, monoglossic or heteroglossic. A monoglossic language ideology is one that understands languages as separate within a bilingual's brain. It imagines that the bilinguals have separate language buckets for each of their languages that do not mix. It also imagines that bilingual language output should look exactly like that of monolingual speakers. No interaction among the multiple languages or codes that the bilingual speaks. On the other side of this language ideology binary is heteroglossic language ideology, which acknowledges the interconnectedness of bilingual language systems. This ideology acknowledges the constant interaction among all of a bilingual's languages. Now, we will use this language ideology lens to examine 4 bilingual education theoretical frameworks. Under a monoglossic ideology exists subtractive and additive bilingualism. In a subtractive bilingual framework, students' first language, or L1, is replaced by the majority language, or the L2. They lose their first language and ultimately end up speaking only their second language, the majority language in that community. The goal of subtractive bilingualism is monolingualism and monoculturalism. The other monoglossic framework is additive bilingualism. In an additive bilingual framework, students end up speaking both their L1 and the majority language, their L2. While this framework does maintain the student's first language, thereby making students bilingual, it is monoglossically oriented because it imagines that those two languages do not interact. 2 other bilingual education theoretical frameworks exist under a heteroglossic ideology, recursive bilingualism and dynamic bilingualism. The recursive theoretical framework promotes biculturalism and bilingualism through language revitalization, encouraging students' connections to their cultures of origin. It does not imagine bilingualism as an endpoint, but rather as a stop along the language continuum. The other theoretical framework under which a heteroglossic ideology is the dynamic bilingual framework. The dynamic bilingual framework promotes bilingualism and biculturalism and encourages the interplay of languages and cultures. Before beginning to discuss the history of bilingual education in the United States and Massachusetts, it is important to first discuss another binary through which to understand language policy: assimilationist versus pluralist discourse. Assimilationist discourse assumes monolingualism and monoculturalism as the norm, and, as the name suggests, forces minoritized speakers to assimilate to the majority language and culture. Pluralist discourse, on the other hand, assumes a heteroglossic stance that bilingualism is the norm, encouraging learners to use all of their linguistic resources together. With these theoretical frameworks, ideologies, and discourses in mind, we will now begin discussing the history of bilingual education in the United States and specifically Massachusetts. The area now known as the United States has been largely plurilingual throughout history. the Native Americans spoke hundreds of different languages, and the invading Europeans spoke several languages, including English, French, Spanish, and German. Until the second half of the 19th century, the United States favored pluralist language policy, and most schools were bilingual in nature. Near the turn of the 20th century, several critical events shifted language policy in favor of assimilationist policies. First, the Industrial Revolution led to compulsory education and the beginning of standardization in education as it was offered more widely to the masses. Additionally, new groups of immigrants arrived to the United States. Uncertainty about these unknown immigrants and their countries of origin, coupled with increased tensions during the First World War, bred xenophobia and contributed to the rise of nationalist policies. Here, the modern assimilationist link between patriotism and speaking standard English was born. Just as politics shaped the language policy in the early 20th century, political and social changes in the latter half of the 20th century shifted language policy back toward pluralism. The Cold War with Russia increased interest in foreign language education, and the Civil Rights era led to greater recognition and legislation for minoritized language groups. Several critical Supreme Court cases were decided, and laws were passed to protect the rights of all students to have access to classroom instruction in their home language. Since the beginning of the 21st century, the pendulum of language policy has again swung toward assimilationist policies, particularly with the No Child Left Behind legislation. Additionally, some states, including Massachusetts, have voted for English-only laws. In 2002, Massachusetts voted in favor of the Massachusetts English Language Education in Public Schools Initiative, also known as Question 2. This law prohibited instruction in languages other than English until it was overturned in 2017, at which time the revised law allowed students to receive some of their instruction in other languages via bilingual programs. Question 2 did not occur in a void. Rather, assimilationist language policies have been gaining traction throughout the United States in the first 2 decades of the 21st century. The language policy that I will be proposing this evening is rooted in theoretical and historical contexts I have previously detailed. It is also important to understand the community of Framingham in order to truly understand why such a policy is critical for this community. While statistics tell an incomplete story, they do provide a picture of the community in question. Framingham is a school district of about 8,700 students, which means that our language and educational policies affect many students and families. For 48% of our students, English is not their first language. This is more than 20% higher for Framingham than for the state of Massachusetts as a whole. About 45% of our students receive free or reduced lunch. The pie chart on this slide shows the racial breakdown of the student body. Framingham is a racially diverse district, as you can see. As such, it is critical that our policies within the district reflect this diversity and aim for equity and justice for all students from all language and racial backgrounds. With all of this historical background and theoretical framework in mind, I'm here to strongly advocate for universal bilingual education for the students in Framingham Public Schools. All students deserve the benefits of bilingual education. Framingham has been providing high quality bilingual education to many students through several two-way dual language programs. And my language policy expands those efforts to include all students in the district. Under my proposed language policy, all Framingham Public Schools students would receive education in a two-way dual language setting. This proposal is heteroglossic in nature, acknowledging that students come to school with many language resources that should be used together to strengthen academic work. Furthermore, my policy is situated within a dynamic bilingual framework in which bilingualism and biculturalism are expected outcomes. Finally, my policy is a pluralist one, which assumes that multilingualism is the norm and encourages students to own and expand their linguistic and cultural repertoire in the school setting. Given the high number of Spanish and Portuguese speakers in the school district, bilingual programming will be allocated proportionally to those two languages based on the number of speakers of each one within the school district at the time of implementation. Allocations will be reviewed every 5 years and adapted as necessary as the population shifts over time. I recognize that Framingham has many students whose home language or languages are not English, Spanish, or Portuguese. For that reason, the district will implement changes to assessment and classroom materials based on current research in the field of translanguaging. Translanguaging is a practice that allows students to use their entire linguistic repertoire within the classroom, rather than restricting them to one language code or another. As such, all students will have access to at least 50% of classroom materials, books, videos, etc., in their home language, and they will be allowed flexibility in the language they choose for output in at least 50% of formal and informal assignments. This means that a student whose home language is Quechua will have Quechua resources available for 50% of classroom activities, which will allow them to make meaning out of a text or video in whichever language or languages they choose. They will also be allowed flexibility in the language or languages of output for 50% of assignments. In a writing class, this might look like being allowed flexibility in the language or languages used to write weekly journal entries and 2 of 5 formal papers for class. I understand that this is a large and daunting undertaking for teachers. These changes will be implemented over the next 3 years. Teachers will receive 18 hours of professional development per year in best practices for bilingual education and translanguaging pedagogy. Additionally, over the next 3 years, rubrics for district assessments will be amended to reflect a translanguaging stance, and coaches and specialists will work with grade level teams and individual teachers to amend other rubrics and assessment measures. There are so many types of bilingual programs. You may be wondering then, why two-way dual language? Two-way dual language programs have been well researched, and there are numerous benefits. First, research documents that two-way dual language programs are able to meaningfully counteract the negative effects of low socioeconomic status. As a district with nearly 45% of students receiving free or reduced lunch, this is incredibly beneficial. Additionally, an overwhelming majority of the students would receive instruction in their home language, Portuguese, Spanish, or English. Research documents that students who learn to read and write in their home language, at least until ages 11 or 12, typically end up several years ahead of their peers in school. These benefits are enormous, given that Framingham is a school district, again, with nearly 45% of the students receiving free or reduced lunch, and about 48% of the students' first language not being English. We have much to gain from a two-way dual language program. Finally, two-way dual language programs, combined with translanguaging pedagogy, invite all of our learners into their own education process to receive meaningful education in their home language. Above all, it sends the message to our students, families, and the community that their language practices are valued. Now to speak more broadly of bilingual development in general, not just in a two-way dual language setting, there are numerous cognitive, social, and societal benefits of bilingualism. Bilinguals enjoy heightened metalinguistic awareness, which allows them to think critically about language and make connections across language. Relatedly, bilinguals are more likely to engage in divergent thinking, which demonstrates increased mental flexibility and creative problem solving. Another cognitive benefit of bilingualism is that bilingualism positively affects executive functioning, allowing bilinguals more control over their ability to follow directions, pay attention, and think flexibly. In terms of social benefits, bilingualism allows students to communicate actively in more global and local contexts, which increases their career potential. For example, students who become bilingual in Spanish and English become more marketable employees because they can communicate effectively in either language with potential clients or business partners. This bilingualism is equally valuable in the local context here in Framingham. Being bilingual here means that students can engage more fully in this bilingual community and can successfully navigate interactions with speakers of multiple languages. Furthermore, bilinguals enjoy increased metacultural awareness, or the increased understanding of cultural differences. Again, this provides bilinguals yet more tools to engage with both an increasingly multicultural world and a multicultural local community. Framingham Public Schools educate speakers of many different home languages, and those students would benefit even more from my proposed language policy. In addition to the aforementioned cognitive and social benefits of bilingualism that they would enjoy, many of them would benefit from being instructed in their home language as well as English. There is research to support that students who maintain their first language while learning a second language learn it faster. This means that our Ls could more quickly become proficient in English and exit the ESL program. While it is not possible to educate all of our Ls in their home language, all students will enjoy the benefits of translanguaging. Translanguaging will allow them to receive input and produce output in the language of their choosing for some of their academic time, as noted previously. This will provide them with greater ownership over their learning and an opportunity to demonstrate their learning with wider linguistic repertoire. I've discussed the cognitive and social benefits of bilingualism in terms of the individual, but these benefits ripple out to the wider society as well. As a Framingham community, we all want our students to be able to engage positively with the residents of the city and to contribute positively to the community. Particularly in our multilingual community, students who are bilingual are able to engage with residents more easily, whether a coffee shop employee or a friend's parent. Bilinguals who enjoy greater metacultural awareness can help bridge cultural differences for others, helping them to break the invisible cultural barriers that easily cause misunderstanding. Above all, we want our students to become productive citizens, and bilingualism affords them the cognitive and social advantages to do so. I understand that this proposal is, for many of you, a significant departure from the ways in which you typically understand education. As a teacher, you may be worried about an increased workload. As a parent, you may be worried about the implications of this sort of program on your children. I want to acknowledge that changing a school system, particularly when the changes go against the norm, is difficult work, both logistically and emotionally. Sit with that discomfort for a while. Understand where it's coming from. We will work through this together, and the resulting system will be a better, more equitable one for our students. Two-way dual language programs are backed by decades of extensive research, and we will continue to adapt our program to the changing needs of our community. Let me leave you with a short thought experiment. I want you to think back to your experience in school. If you are like me, you received most or all of your schooling in your native language. And if you're anything like me, there was never any doubt that you should receive your education in your native language. It seemed almost common sense that you should receive education in the same language that you spoke at home in order to provide you with the greatest chance of success. The language of your education was never a fight or a debate. It was a given. To come back to the present, I want to remind you that your experience is different than that of many Framingham students right now. They have to fight for the chance to learn in their native language. It is not a given for them. But by enacting a bilingualism for all language policy, it will be a given. All students will have access to instruction in multiple languages and will be provided with opportunities to translanguage in order to further facilitate their learning. That, I would argue, is truly common sense.